Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today, we're going to talk about the differences between Battleship New Jersey and a comparable Japanese battleship, Yamato. This is the first in a series of videos where we're going to compare different ships. And we're going to start off with comparing different major World War II ships to New Jersey. And if you guys like that content, we'll keep going with videos like this until we've described the various design features and histories of a number of the world's greatest battleships. Heck, we might even get into some battleships that were designed but not even completed. So, on paper, Yamato seems to outclass New Jersey in almost every way. And next to me, we're going to put some vital stats. But the important stuff to take away from this is Battleship New Jersey was limited by the escalator clause of the Second London Naval Treaty. So the design of that ship and the other Iowa-class battleships was supposed to be for something displacing 45,000 tons standard displacement and a main gun battery not to exceed 16 inches. The reason New Jersey was limited to this was in case the various soon-to-be Axis powers wouldn't agree to the lower standards of a 14-inch main gun and 35,000-ton displacement. In fact, Japan and Italy did not sign the Second London Naval Treaty, and Japan in particular began building ships well above what the Allied ships were designing, which is what invoked the escalator clause. The thought at the time, especially among the Allied nations, was that 45,000 tons and a 16-inch main battery was about as large as battleships would go. At the end of World War I, different nations had built 30 and 35,000 ton battleships, and they had planned larger battleships than that. Some even having 18-inch guns, some above 45,000 tons. But then for the last 20 years, various naval treaties had either prevented battleships from being built entirely or had limited battleships to a set design. So they thought it was improbable that the design would jump in one giant step from 35,000 tons to something more massive. 10,000 ton jump, reasonable. More than that, probably not going to happen. Well, on the other side of the Pacific, Japan knew that the Allies were building a number of modern battleships at 35,000 tons, and that the escalator clause limited future battleships to 45,000 tons. And they knew that they had been forced by the treaties to be inferior in number of ships to the Allied powers. So they determined that any battleships they built had to be able to survive a fight with multiple enemy battleships. So they designed the largest warship they thought was possible at the time. And that ended up being the Yamato class. After a number of designs over a number of years, they were able to work their way up to Yamato. So Battleship New Jersey was designed to be 45,000 tons standard displacement. At a full load displacement, she would be approximately 57,500 tons. Battleship Yamato, on the other hand, was designed to be about 65,000 tons normal load displacement and over 70,000 tons fully loaded. So we're talking about two massively different ships in terms of displacement. However, despite the displacement discrepancy, the actual size and fighting power is fairly comparable. So this is the battleship Yamato in 1/1800 scale. Next to her is the Battleship New Jersey. Battleship New Jersey is longer at 887 foot 7 inches compared to Yamato's 862 foot 10 inches. On the beam, however, Battleship New Jersey is narrower. Her 108 foot 3 inch beam was designed to pass through the Panama Canal. Japanese designers had no such restriction and were able to design a ship 127 foot 7 inches wide. This theoretically makes the Japanese ship a better gunnery platform because she is wider and shorter. However, it makes the American ship faster. Her length to beam ratio is much higher. Battleship New Jersey has the edge in speed with a 33 knot main speed, while Battleship Yamato could only make 27 knots at full speed. In reality, in wartime, fully loaded, neither of these ships could make that full speed. However, New Jersey's meant that she could keep up with the aircraft carriers. Yamato rarely operated with Japanese carriers. In terms of cruising range, the Battleship Yamato could sail over 7,000 nautical miles at 16 knots, while Battleship New Jersey could sail 15,000 nautical miles at 15 knots. The reason for the difference in design and speed was doctrine. The Japanese were expecting to fight a single decisive battle like they had at Tsushima during the Russo-Japanese War in the early 1900s, close to the home islands. The United States was expecting to have to fight their way from the West Coast all the way across the Pacific to attack Japan. So the Japanese ships, protected beyond their barrier of occupied islands, didn't need the range to go all the way across the ocean the way that the American ships did, where they would theoretically be completely unsupported and in enemy territory. Each ship had relatively comparable crew sizes, with about 2,700 or so crew when they were fully loaded with an admiral and staff and everything else on board, enough men to man all the anti-aircraft guns. At a minimum, Battleship New Jersey was usually designed for a little over 2,000. Yamato would be closer to about 2,500. So you can see that the two battleships are very similar. Each one features a tall superstructure with a rangefinder on top. This allows them to spot fall of shot from their main guns out to the horizon. Firing further than that, you can see that each ship carries float planes on the fantail. And these models don't show it, but they also had cranes and catapults to launch and recover the aircraft with. Yamato has a single smokestack. All of her boilers are trunked into one exhaust, while Battleship New Jersey has two smokestacks. This is an outward sign of speed. Fewer smokestacks. Generally, you can guess that it's a slower ship. More smokestacks combined with a longer length means a faster ship. Each ship has the same main battery arrangement with 9 main battery guns. For New Jersey, they're 16-inch guns. On Yamato, they're 18.1-inch guns, making them the largest guns ever mounted by a ship. As an aside, during World War I, the British built a large light cruiser named Furious that was armed with a single-barreled 18-inch gun. So Yamato's 18.1-inch guns narrowly beat her out. You can also see along the sides of the ship a number of secondary battery guns. These are 5-inch guns. For New Jersey, there are 20 of them in 10 twin mounts. For Yamato, in this model, there are 24 in 12 twin mounts. As originally designed, she had only half as many, however, but she had twice as many of these guns. These are a 6.1-inch gun, which were designed with the idea in mind that the 18-inch guns turn relatively slowly. It takes a long time to load them, so it'll be difficult to fire at small, fast-moving targets. So the 6-inch guns were added as defense against enemy destroyers, light cruisers, things like that. During the war, they found out that having one on each end of the superstructure and then another one on each beam was really superfluous. These ships were much more threatened by aircraft than they were by enemy destroyers, and so they were able to sacrifice the 2 beam-mounted guns and replace them with additional 5-inch guns for anti-aircraft. You might also be able to see different gray spots around these ships, which represent their anti-aircraft battery. For the Japanese ship, Yamato had a maximum of 162 25mm guns, while New Jersey had a maximum of 49 20mm guns, but 80 40mm guns. So New Jersey would first engage targets with the 5-inch guns at long range, then the 40mm guns at intermediate range, and finally 20mm guns at close range. The Japanese battleship was only designed with the 5-inch guns in mind, and then with the 25mm as enemy aircraft got closer. In theory, the 6-inch guns could be used as anti-aircraft guns, but in practice, they didn't load or train nearly fast enough for that. In practice, the Japanese also used their 18-inch guns as anti-aircraft guns. They developed a special type of shell that they could use to fire out of the main battery guns, which was bad for the rifling of the guns. But when Yamato was doing her famous kamikaze mission in April of 1945, she was attacked by more American aircraft than the Japanese had used to attack Pearl Harbor, some 400 aircraft from about 8 separate aircraft carriers. And so she needed all the help she could get. And I've read that the explosion of the shells wasn't particularly bad, but the shells flying through the air past the American aircraft did throw them around some. Let's look over here at armor plating. Yamato severely outpaces New Jersey when it comes to armor plating. New Jersey's belt is about 12.2 inches thick, whereas Yamato's is a full 16 inches thick. In theory, about 1 inch of belt armor will stop about 1 inch of projectile. So this would indicate that New Jersey's belt could not stop an 18-inch shell from Yamato, but Yamato's belt could stop a 16-inch shell from New Jersey. We'll talk a little bit more about the shells later on, but in theory, when these ships were being designed in the late 30s, that was the number that you could use. For the deck, Yamato's deck was anywhere from just under 8 inches thick to just under 9 inches thick. Most of New Jersey's deck was only 6 inches thick. For the gun turrets, Battleship New Jersey's faceplates were about 17 inches thick, while Yamato's was closer to 25 inches thick. So, the United States initially authorized 2 Iowa-class battleships, Iowa and New Jersey. A year later, they authorized 2 more, Missouri and Wisconsin. And then a year later, they authorized the final 2, Illinois and Kentucky. These last 2 were never completed. The reason the U.S. Navy continued to authorize Iowa-class ships was because that design was done and they were in the middle of a war, so they wanted to just churn them out. They had other designs for larger battleships in place, ships closer to the displacement of Yamato. But those designs were not fully completed, so they kept getting postponed in favor of more Iowa-class ships. Yamato was the lead ship of her class. She was followed by a sister ship, Musashi. And then a third ship, Shinano, was being built. And this ship was never completed as a battleship. She was almost almost completed as an aircraft carrier, and she was torpedoed by a American submarine while underway near Japan. She was never fully activated. A fourth ship, number 111, the name was never authorized, was to be constructed, but was, of course, never completed. And further ships to this design or similar designs, possibly even having larger guns, were planned but never built. This brings us to our comparison of the two ships. How would they stack up in battle? Now, they never got the chance to fight each other. 4 Iowa-class ships that were completed all saw service in World War II, starting in 1943, and ending with 2 of the ships in Tokyo Harbor in 1945, and all the ships participating in the occupation of Japan, and then continuing in service up until the 1990s. Musashi didn't do too much in her career. Oil shortages limited her from being deployed too much. She was used as office space by various Japanese admirals. Her big chance for glory came during the invasion of the Philippines, when the United States was invading the Japanese-held Philippines. She was part of a battle group that was sailing through the San Bernardino Strait and the Siboyan Sea to try and get at the American invasion fleet off Leyte. She was attacked by American carrier aircraft and destroyed. Her sister ship Yamato survived that battle, even got to fire her main guns against American escort carriers and destroyers before retreating from the smaller ships, and then was being held in reserve in the home islands waiting for the American invasion of Japan until the emperor asked what the Navy's contribution to the defense of Okinawa was. Up until that point, it had been nothing, but the admiral's pride were damaged, so they got together every ship they could get oil from, and they didn't really have enough oil to send them on a 2-way trip, but that included the Battleship Yamato, a light cruiser, and 8 destroyers. And they sent these ships to go attack the American invasion fleet at Okinawa in April 1945. They were spotted by submarines immediately as they left port and shadowed. Soon, American carrier aircraft started arriving overhead to continue shadowing them, and then full American strike group got overhead. Iowa-class battleships were waiting at Okinawa if Yamato could fight her way through the airstrike, and there was even some debate among American admirals whether she should be destroyed by aircraft or whether an overwhelming number of Allied battleships should go out and engage her. As many as 18 American, British, and maybe even a French battleship participated in the invasion of Okinawa. So even though Yamato was designed to fight against multiple Allied ships, 18-1 odds are not great no matter how you look at them. So she was sunk by bombs and torpedoes by carrier aircraft. What would have happened if these two ships got the chance to fight each other? They were in close proximity on 2 separate occasions. As you know, off Okinawa, the carrier aircraft were sent in instead. Off Leyte Gulf, the American battleships had gone in the wrong direction after Japanese carriers, and so missed the chance to fight the Japanese battleships. Honestly, this would have been a pretty fair fight, despite everything the Japanese tried to design into their ships to make it not a fair fight. And that's the problem with these ships. Yamato was a huge expenditure of resources. And for the 60,000 tons of quality steel used to build the ship, they did not design a ship of much greater fighting quality than an Iowa-class battleship, significantly lighter, about a third lighter. So she had larger guns. That's great. They could shoot further. They shot a heavier shell, and they could penetrate an Iowa-class battleship's armor. However, the Iowa-class battleships were faster, so they could theoretically choose where and when to fight. While their guns were smaller, the rates of fire were similar, and the Americans had a super heavy 16-inch shell that weighed 2,700 pounds, only a couple hundred pounds lighter than the Japanese shell. So their shells could do significant damage to Yamato depending on where they hit. In terms of anti-aircraft guns, the Iowas had much better anti-aircraft defenses. The guns that they used were just better than the Japanese guns, as were the fire control and the radar. And in terms of electronics, while Yamato did get radar near the end of the war, it was never as good as either the American surface or air search sets. So if visibility wasn't perfect, the Iowa-class ships had a fire control advantage because they could rely on their radar much more than the Japanese battleships could rely on theirs. The Mark 8 Rangekeeper that the American battleships used was also much better than the Japanese method of fire control, where you had to plot each shot individually. The American Rangekeeper continued to plot based on feedback from previous shots and based on the motion of ships, so you didn't have to recalculate with every single shot. In terms of armor plate, Japanese ship much better, but still not necessarily good enough. We've got a picture here posted of some of the 25-inch armor plate that was not used on Shinano that the United States recovered after the war and then test fired one of their 16-inch shells against. And as you can see, there's a nice big hole in it. Would that have worked at all ranges of battle? Could the American shell penetrate the Japanese armor? No. The Japanese armor was immune at far greater ranges than the American armor was immune from Japanese fire, but it still wasn't impenetrable. And it could take as little as one hit to mission kill an enemy battleship. And only a couple of hits could severely cripple an enemy ship. So even if you can't defeat the enemy's armored citadel, if you can land a couple of hits and disrupt their fire control, the battle's already lost. So, Yamato was the better ship. She was much heavier guns, heavier armor. But for being 1/3 heavier and theoretically more powerful than an Iowa-class battleship, she wasn't actually 1/3 better. An Iowa-class battleship still had a pretty fair fight, and there were more of them. Thank you for watching with us today. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Tell us what you liked about this video if you want to see more content like this in the future. Tell us how you think these two ships would have fared if they ever fought each other. Remember, if you would like to support Battleship New Jersey and the content we're creating, there's a link in the description down below. Otherwise, thanks for watching and tune back in for more content in the future.